All right, today we're jumping into one of the greatest founding stories of all time. I mean, it's got everything. We're talking gods, mortals, some serious family betrayal, and a city that was just destined for greatness. Of course, I'm talking about the mythic birth of Rome.
I mean, it's a huge question, isn't it? How does something like an empire actually get started? Is it a single battle, a stuffy political treaty, maybe one great leader? Well, for Rome, the answer is a little more, let's just say, wild.
Yep, a she-wolf. The story of what would become one of the most powerful empires in human history, it kicks off with 2 abandoned babies and a wolf. And honestly, it's a legend that is just as bloody and ambitious as Rome itself would turn out to be.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First up, the twins' divine and pretty violent birth. Then we'll get into the revenge plot and that fateful rivalry. After that, we'll actually look at the archaeology and see what's legend and what might be reality. And finally, we'll talk about why this myth was just so powerful for the city of Rome.
So our story actually kicks off not in Rome itself, but in a neighboring kingdom called Alba Longa. And it all starts with a classic, almost Shakespearean case of royal jealousy, one that sets this whole dark and kind of miraculous story in motion.
Now, the kings of Alba Longa, they claim to be descended from the legendary Trojan hero Aeneas. And look, this isn't just some throwaway detail. It's meant to tell you that this bloodline is special, destined for something great. But then you have King Aemilius, who steals the throne from his own brother Numitor, and he's absolutely determined to make sure that royal bloodline ends right there, with him. So, to make sure his brother couldn't have any heirs to challenge him, Aemilius forces his niece, Rhea Silvia, into one of the most sacred roles possible, a Vestal Virgin. This was a huge deal. It meant a 30-year vow of absolute chastity. Breaking it was a death sentence. For Aemilius, this was a clever political move, a way to basically erase her family line. But, fate, or maybe the gods, had something else in mind.
Against all odds, Rhea Silvia becomes pregnant with twins. Now, to save her own life and the lives of her kids, she makes this incredibly bold claim. The father? Oh, just Mars, the literal god of war. And the ancient writers, they really lean into this. They say the babies were huge, beautiful, clearly more than human, all signs of their divine dad. But of course, the king, Aemilius, he doesn't see divine children. He just sees a massive threat to his throne. So the king orders the twins to be thrown into the Tiber River to drown. But right away, things get weird. The river, which was flooded, actually seems to protect them, gently floating their little basket to the riverbank. And this is where the signs from their supposed father, Mars, get really obvious. A she-wolf, an animal sacred to Mars, finds them and nurses them. Then a woodpecker, another of Mars's symbols, brings them bits of food. It's like a whole divine welcome party. Eventually, a shepherd named Faustulus stumbles upon them and, along with his wife, decides to raise these mysterious boys as his own.
So we go from miraculous survival to founding an empire? How does that happen? Well, the boys, now named Romulus and Remus, they grow up to be these strong, natural leaders, but they have no idea they're actually royalty. But you can't outrun destiny forever, and it's about to come knocking in a pretty dramatic fashion.
Okay, so this is the moment everything just flips. Remus gets into some trouble, gets captured, and is dragged in front of, you guessed it, his own grandfather, the old King Numitor. And Numitor just looks at this kid, sees his noble spirit, and it clicks. He knows who this is. And just like that, the secret's out, the brothers find out they're princes, they rally a bunch of followers, they storm the palace, kick out the tyrant Aemilius, and put their granddad right back on the throne.
So, with their family's kingdom back in order, the brothers decide, hey, let's build our own city. But who gets to be king? They decide to let the gods choose through a practice called augury, basically birdwatching for divine science. Remus goes up on the Aventine Hill and bam, he sees 6 vultures first. He thinks, I win. But then, a little later, Romulus on the Palatine Hill sees a whopping 12 vultures. So what's the right answer? Is it who saw them first or who saw more? The gods were being incredibly vague here, and this ambiguity, it's what ultimately dooms them.
Romulus doesn't wait for an answer. He starts building a city wall on the Palatine Hill.
Remus, feeling cheated and angry, comes over, and basically to make fun of him, he just hops over the tiny half-built wall. And in that instant, Romulus snaps. In a fit of rage, he kills his own twin brother. And as Remus lies dead, Romulus delivers that chilling line, basically saying, "This is what happens to anyone who dares cross my walls." The city's foundation is literally sealed in his brother's blood. There would be one king, and the city would be called Rome after Romulus.
What a story, right? It's just incredible. But now that we've heard the legend, we have to ask the really big question. Is any of this real? Is there even a tiny piece of historical truth buried in this wild, dramatic, and violent tale? Well, let's see what the actual evidence says.
Okay, so for hundreds of years, the Romans had a very, very specific birthday for their city. April 21st, 753 BC. This wasn't just a random date, it was a huge part of their identity, a national holiday. So the legend gives us a precise moment in time. But what does the dirt under the city of Rome actually tell us?
And this is where things get really interesting. Now, obviously, nobody's found a she-wolf's cave. But check this out. The myth says the city was founded on the Palatine Hill. Archaeologists start digging, and what do they find on the Palatine Hill? The earliest Iron Age huts, dating back to around 900 BC. The myth says Romulus built a foundational wall. Archaeologists have found traces of a very early wall, dated to about 730 BC. That's crazy close to the legendary date of 753. So the biggest difference seems to be that the legend talks about a city being founded in a single day, while the reality is probably that Rome grew more slowly, with a bunch of little villages on the hills gradually merging together.
And that really brings us to the most important point about Romulus and Remus. Because in the end, whether the story was 100% historically accurate almost doesn't matter. What truly mattered to the Romans and to history was what this story did for their civilization.
You see, this wasn't just some bedtime story. It was a powerful political tool. You had emperors, like the great Augustus, who actively promoted this legend to connect their own rule back to a divine origin. The she-wolf and the twins, that became the logo of Rome, stamped right onto their coins for everyone in the empire to see. Great writers, like Virgil, wrote epic poems about it. For centuries, this story hammered home one core message to every Roman citizen. Your city is not an accident. It was chosen by the gods. It was born from violence and strength. And it is destined for greatness. So, when you look at it that way, the story of Romulus and Remus teaches us something profound. A city might be built from stone and soil, sure, but an empire is often built on a story. And that leaves us with this huge, fascinating question to think about. Which is ultimately stronger, the history that actually happened or the story we all decide to tell about ourselves?